I did everything that my dad was, told me to do. So I finished Vanderbilt in 3 years,
Wow.
with all the honors and all the
Yeah.
stuff, and president of the fraternity. I was vice president of the powerlifting club. Like I did all the things, right? And then I got the swanky consulting job right out of college for 2 years. And I remember thinking, like, is this it? You know what I mean? Because I was 21 at this point. I'd graduated college. I had the good job. I had my own condo that I had bought because I'd saved the money. And I was looking out over the high rises, and I was like, is it just more of this? Is this it? And I knew that I was not satisfied with the job that I wanted. I knew that I wanted to start a business. And every time that I'd gone to tell my dad that that's what I wanted to do, he would end up talking me off the ledge and saying, "No, we will go to business school, and then you'll go, back to the management, or you can go to investment banking if you want to do that, and then after that you'll save some money, and then you can start a business, right?" And it got to the point where I was so incredibly depressed that I wanted to not wake up every day. So I would go to bed hoping that I wouldn't wake up. And and for me, many of the biggest decisions in my life have come down to life or death. And I say that only as a decision-making filter, not that, I was at this crossroads, but death for whatever reason is very motivating for me. And so the conclusion that I had to come to for me to make this move, despite my father, who had a tremendous amount of influence over me, especially at a younger age, was I can either die to him or I can die to me.
Wow.
And so I knew that by leaving this path and quitting and then starting a gym, which is kind of like the electrician job,
That's
a
right.
trade,
Yeah.
especially in the Middle Eastern world where you can be a doctor, an accountant. I mean, me being in business was already like I was pre-med originally. You know what I mean? I just convinced I hated medicine. I had no desire to have his life. Because his plan for me was that I was going to take over his practice.
Sure.
That was the whole deal. And it made sense on paper. The guy makes $1 million a year.
Yeah.
And he's like, you could inherit it when you're 29, making $1 million a year. He's like, why would you not do and I get the argument.
Yeah.
But I would have been dead inside the entire time, and I would have been in prison for my whole life. And so when I did make that move, and this is for everybody who's looking for the happy ending, it did make a huge fissure, or a huge gap in our relationship.
Sure.
And for years, we barely spoke. And it was only after not only that I had made more money and then made more money than he'd ever made, did the dynamic shift to one where he respected what I had done. And it took probably almost a decade, you know what I mean, for that to actually happen.
Yeah.
And so I will say that if you are going through this and you feel dead to yourself in the current existence, in the current path, it will not get better. You will only have put more time in burning time of your own life that is limited.
That's right.
To fill someone else's dream. And it was his dream of what he wanted for my life as it reflected on him as a parent.
Oh, yeah.
And I get where he was coming from. So it's like you can understand why they have this belief, and then yet also disagree with it and act in according to your belief. And so that it's just it's very real for me because I went through that. It was very, very, very hard for me. Yeah. It was probably the hardest decision in my life, was disobeying my father, because it was like disobeying. It wasn't just like I was being disobedient. And then doing this on my own. And I to show how much influence my dad had over me, I only called him to tell him I was doing this when I was 6 states away. I started driving. I was in Ohio or something, and I called him to tell him that I had gone. And he said, "Hey, just come back for lunch. We'll talk it over." Because it was always the same thing. Alexander, because that's what he calls me. Alexander's having one of his little fits about life. He'll come back. I'll talk him out of it. I was like, I'm gone. And he was like, and then the flip switch. Then it was like, wow, you got to be so crazy. You're always so extreme. You always have to, all these things. And it stayed like that for a while. But like at that point, then that was where the fear came from, where the fear of him being right. And then that was the big driver for a very long time, was that even when things were so hard for me because they were very difficult for me in the beginning, I would rather have died than let him be right. I could not accept an existence where I would have to come back with my tail between my legs. And then, because what would have happened is if I had not succeeded there, I would have basically had to become his slave for the rest of my life. At least that's how I saw my life playing out. If I had not been able to make this work. And so I did everything. I just couldn't go back to that.
Oh, it's a powerful motivator, but man, it sucked for you. And parents, I mean, I don't know who's watching this, but if you got a little one, I hope you rewind that story, because I think that the parental fear can turn into a nightmare for our kids. And luckily for you, maybe not luck, depending on your, I don't believe in luck on this situation, but the way you were wired, it turned you into a diamond. Yeah. But I just want to call out, and I know this is heavy for the audience, but there are a lot of kids that aren't wired like Alex, and that can destroy their life. You talk about big time depression. I mean, just crazy amounts of soul crushing stuff. So parents, we got to be careful here to not crush our kids' soul. I'm glad it worked out for you.
As am I. And, Dad, love you.
No, we love, and by the way, let me just say, none of this is dishonoring your father, because he's just as normal as every other American. But this is not a Middle Eastern thing. This isn't your dad thing. This is the normal pressure that parents feel, and we've got to call it out, because it comes back full circle to the discussion we had earlier about college and pushing kids into stuff.
And if there's another even wrinkle on this, I think understanding the motivation of the person who's influencing you to stay put is useful, because once you can I think Pascal said, to understand is to forgive.
Yeah, that's right.
And so for me, when I understood that my father and I had the same goals for my life, he wanted me to be successful. I wanted me to be successful. It was just, we wanted to get there in different ways. And there's only one of us that actually has to go through it. And so I felt like my opinion mattered more. And so I think that if we can delineate those things, it is helpful in understanding that they are not adversaries. They actually want your best. This is me all half talking to the kids. Yeah. They want your best, but sometimes, and to the parents, the kid also wants their own best. You know what I mean? And they might know they haven't shared with you, or they're afraid to share it with you. And in so doing, you might actually have an incomplete picture. They did just as a fun side note, they did a survey on political beliefs between whether they're inherited, with kids and parents. What was funny is that I think it was like 45% of kids weren't actually sure of their parents' political beliefs when they actually were asked to name them.
Of course.
And then 75% of parents didn't know their kids' beliefs. And so we think that we know so much about these people that we spend all this time with, and yet on the things that matter most, the harder conversations, we know very little.
So true. And so much could be dealt with easier if we sat down and parents shared their fears with their kids, and the kids shared their fears. And boy, it's so good.